Yeah, this is just a short intro. I found this gem on C-SPAN after searching for Biden and the crime bill. There's a couple things that I found that I may include. It is a nice lesson on the crime bill, the milieu that was going on about what to do about the cocaine trade and how these things actually coalesce well before the 1994 crime bill. He's basically giving you a history of the war on drugs starting in 1986 and the people that are around it. And it basically is bipartisan. You got to remember, as we call him, Sleepy Joe is not a liberal. He never was a liberal. And probably neither is Kamala Harris. And we don't know exactly how much of a non-liberal that Joe Biden is until we hear him talk. And then you realize this dude is as conservative as hell, even more conservative than the fucking Republican president of the United States. But I tried to shorten it up, and I actually was going to only play like 20 minutes of it because I thought it was too long. But if you have the fortitude to actually listen to the whole thing all the way through, and basically there's not much video, the video's fine. You can see him walk around, but basically if you just listen to it, it's actually a lesson on the crime bill and their measures for it and the severe measures, draconian measures they're willing to take, and who this person is and what he's about. All I can say is But if you got a fortitude, man, I let him speak for like an hour before I cut it off. There's more to it. I'll leave the link to the original video in the description. You can go search it for yourself because the whole thing's about over 2 hours long. But for people that want to know and learn, this is a good lesson. And it reminded me a lot of the stuff that was going on at the time by him talking about it. A lot of the things from my memory about these draconian measures, man, actually started to come back. So this is history in the making. And for people, especially young people that weren't aware of what went on, they only hear it hearsay. This is a extremely good lesson out of the horse's mouth. This is your new president. And for people who think that he's a leftist and he's a liberal and all that other crap, he is not. And this is proof that he's not. And now I remember why I did not like Joe Biden. I actually remember now because I had forgotten because, I didn't follow this stuff for a very long time. And I couldn't remember how come I didn't like Joe Biden. But there's reasons I didn't like Joe Biden. And I may do something on him later. But in the meantime, there's people that can, if you can, listen to it all the way through because there's just jewels and gems that are all throughout his pitch for this law. And it'd be well within your learning tool, your toolbox, actually hear what he's got to say. And I would suggest that. I would actually encourage you to go back to the original file and listen to the whole session and hear what they have to say, what was on tape. And I say thank God for C-SPAN. And yeah. But to my folks, without further ado, I present you your 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden. And God help us all.
A literal epidemic of rape in this country. We've also seen all-time national record for violent crime. And this is a product of 100 weeks of tough talk on crime and too little tough action on crime. The president blames this crime plague and in turn the need for a new crime bill on congressional inaction. And he's certainly entitled to make such political statements. Every president does. A Democratic president coined this capability. Harry Truman made it he was a fine president, but he found there was great benefit in running against the Congress. There always is. Were I in the president's position, I would find it great political fodder as well. But he is entitled to engage in such statements. But let's look at the facts. Since 1986, Congress has passed over 230 new or expanded penalties for drug and criminal offenses in this United States. 230 new penalties. And these penalties range from an automatic 5 years in jail for any person caught with a rock of crack cocaine, a piece of crack cocaine as small as a quarter. I don't have a quarter with me, but if you visualize what one looks like, yeah, I do have a quarter. If you have a piece of crack cocaine no bigger than this quarter that I'm holding in my hand, 1/4 of $1, we passed a law through the leadership of Senator Thurmond and myself and others, a law that says if you're caught with that, you go to jail for 5 years. You get no probation. You get nothing other than 5 years in jail. Judge doesn't have a choice. Now, the fact of the matter is, we've gone from there all the way up to saying, under the leadership of Senator Thurmond, and I'd like to suggest that I take some small credit for it myself as well, and others, the presiding officer, that there's now a death penalty. And we passed it a couple years ago. If you are a major drug dealer involved in the trafficking of drugs and murder results in your activities, you go to death. And a number of other severe penalties. We changed the law so that if you are arrested and you are a drug dealer, under our forfeiture statutes, you can, the government can, take everything you own, everything from your car to your house, your bank account, not merely what they confiscate in terms of the dollars from the transaction that you just got caught engaging in. They can take everything. We have laws in the last several years where we don't allow judges discretion to sentence people. Flat time sentencing. You get caught, you go to jail. Well, all of these tools have been at the president's disposal for the last 100 weeks and more. Now, if America's crime problem is worse than it ever was, it's not because the Congress has failed to give the president the tools. It's done its part, but rather because the administration has failed to use the power given to it by the Congress over the last 5 years, and in particular the last 100 weeks, to bring this epidemic under control. Specifically, the administration's record of inaction includes some glaring examples. And the only reason I'm doing this is to try to, so we can cut through all this and try to get down to the facts. So when we start to vote on specific pieces of legislation, we get away from all the hyperbole and political posturing on this legislation. No wonder the press only covers this legislation in terms of the politics of it. You don't hardly ever hear a debate in the press about whether or not one habeas corpus bill is in fact better than the other. You hardly hear ever any discussion about whether or not one sentencing mode is better than another. You hardly ever hear any discussion of the press about whether or not the aid to local law enforcement along the lines I'm suggesting or the president is suggesting, which is better. Because the president, leading the band, and everyone else then here in the Congress, following the drummer, the chief majorette out there, drum major, what happens? We all talk about the politics of it instead of the substance. Well, the facts are glaring how bad things are. 200 days ago, Congress enacted a life in prison for major drug dealers. Yet in the past 3 years, the president has obtained this penalty for only on average 4 drug dealers in the entire country each year. If you live here in Washington, you pick up the paper daily. As a matter of fact, the papers are stopped doing it because people are tired of seeing it. Major drug dealers engaged in turf wars, people getting shot on street corners, murder rate phenomenally high. So we said 43 years ago, put those people in jail for life, no probation, no parole. And in certain circumstances, they kill someone, put them to death. And guess what? Out of all those crimes you read about, out of all of the outrageous actions, this administration on average the last 3 years has gotten on an average 4 persons per year. 4, count them, 4 per year. Think about it. We have about 2 million people who have been using cocaine weekly in this country over the past half decade. But over the past 3 years, the administration has used its power to send drug dealers to jail for life only once every 3 months. The Congress is not tough on crime. 1,000 days ago, Mr. President, Congress gave the President the power to seek the death penalty against drug kingpins who murder. But in the past 1,000 days, this President, during the period of bloodshed and mayhem of which the President has spoken, the President has obtained the death penalty for only one person. One. Congress is not tough. Congress passed a law and said, Mr. President, find these people when you get them, when the Justice Department has them, and they've murdered somebody, put them to death. That's what we said. You have the power. 1,000 days ago, that was given. One time has the vaulted Justice Department under the leadership of Mr. Thornburg, who beats up the Congress all the time, one time have they obtained the death penalty. Now look, maybe there's reasons why they can't. Maybe it's hard to make a case. Maybe there's a whole rationale for why. But I find it, quite frankly, preposterous that this President stands up and says, this Congress is not tough on crime after we've given him all this power. And just to take two examples, he's only 4 times a year put someone in prison for life, and only once gotten the death penalty. 23,500 murders, 2,200,000 people cocaine addicts, 5.7 million felonies a year, one death penalty, 4 times a year life imprisonment. And the Congress is not tough on crime? Mr. President, this quarter, remember I told you before? We passed a law, bipartisan. We said crack cocaine is such a bad deal that if you find someone with this much of it, a quarter's worth, not in value, in size, 5 years in jail. Well, guess what? If the Justice Department in New York City, the U.S. Attorney, arrests you with that much, the police arrest you, and they take you to the Justice Department, and you only have that much, guess what the Justice Department, Mr. Thornburg, says? We're not going to prosecute you. You have to have 10 times that much for us to prosecute you in New York City. Whose judgment is that? The Congress or the President? And guess what? If you're in Miami and you get picked up with this much cocaine, crack cocaine, they say, we're not going to put you in jail for 5 years. And you say, well, we caught him with 10 times this much. They say, nah, we're still not going to do anything. We're not going to prosecute you. You have to have 100 times the minimum amount required. Congress said, put them in jail for 5 years if they have this much. The President said, and he has his own reasons for saying it, and they may be good ones, but he says, no, not unless you have 100 times this much. Are we going to even prosecute you? I ask you, Mr. President, who's not tough on crime? The Congress? The Constitution says we pass the laws. The President enforces the laws. We don't have a vigilante posse up here, Mr. President. We can't start holding court here. We can't prosecute people from here. We can't in the Congress say, arrest him or her or him, bring them into this chamber. We have a law that says you go to jail for 5 years, no probation, no parole. If you have this much, they had this much, the jury finds they have this much, lock them up and put them in our prison. We have 3 equal branches of the government. One branch, the presidency, is supposed to enforce the laws. Now, if you wonder why I'm so frustrated, Mr. President, I've been dealing with this issue, crime. I have been either the sponsor or co-sponsor of every major tough piece of legislation relating to dealing with the criminal element in this country in the last 10 years, as many others have. And I hear the president tell me I'm not tough on crime. And he gets a death penalty once? Is he trying to tell me there's only one person out there in the last 1,000 days that has met the statutory requirement of death as a consequence of being a drug kingpin? Is there only one drug kingpin who murdered somebody that got caught in the last 1,000 days? Is that what he's saying to me? Or is he saying to me that for whatever reasons they were not able to or chose not to use the laws at the disposal of them made available by this very tough Congress on crime? Mr. President, 1,000 hours ago, 1,000 hours. President has us all in units of 100 these days. He likes to talk about 100 hours, 100 days. 1,000 hours ago, the President of the United States of America went on television, if I'm not mistaken, he did announce it on TV as drug strategy, went on television and said to the American people, as he was required to by a law passed by this Congress and written by me, to tell us what his national drug strategy was. So he stood before the American people and all the press that's sitting up there, and he said, here is my national drug strategy. And he said, it's tough. And so I said, they asked me to comment, I said, some parts are really good, some parts aren't, but I'm waiting for the president to send up more than his speech. I got his speech, got that. But now he's supposed to do what all presidents do. He takes his speech and he reduces it to a piece of legislation. And he sends it up to the Congress. And he says, now Congress, here's what I want you to do. If you want to amend it, we'll debate it. If you don't agree with it, change it. But this is what I want you to do. Here's the legislation I want to become law. So, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, asked by the press, will I move and act on the president's legislation? I said, as soon as we get it, we'll act. 1,000 hours ago. Guess what, Mr. President? The president hasn't sent us anything. Not a word, has he? Not a word other than over the television. Not a single thing has he sent to the House Judiciary Committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, the leadership of the Senate, the leadership of the House, the minority leader, the majority leader, anybody. Hello, Mr. President, where is it? And we're not tough? We're not acting on initiatives to try to stem the scourge of drugs in this country and violent crime? 1,000 hours ago, he said to all these people, I've got an idea. This is how I'm going to help stop the drug problem. And he hadn't sent us a thing. Not one single little bit. And then I hear him on television and hear his Attorney General stand up and say, our problem is the Congress is not tough. The problem is we have such an incredibly low regard in the minds of the public, and with some good reason, myself included, that you can just about say anything about the Congress and anyone will believe it. So when in trouble, blame the Congress. When in trouble, it's like that ad. There used to be an ad on TV for cereal, and three little brothers are sitting there, and there's one little chubby little brother in the middle sort of sitting like this, and it's a new cereal. And they look at it and they say, what is this cereal? I don't know. Gosh, what are you thinking? Well, let's try it. No. Well, Mikey will try it. And they pour a bowl for Mikey. Well, there's a rule in politics. When a president's in trouble, doesn't have an answer, what do? Let's have a meeting. Got it. Congress. Congress did it. Or Congress didn't do it. There's a lot we don't do. And by the very nature of this institution of 535 persons, it's not designed to move quickly. But the executive is designed, as the presiding officer knows as a former governor, that's the mark of the leadership of an executive, to move quickly, decisively, and with incision. Where's the drug bill? Is the Attorney General too busy? The drugs are too busy? Where is it? I want to help. Where is it? Mr. President, there are many other examples. Last year, responding to the administration request, Congress created new federal judgeships. An unusual circumstance, Mr. President. People who don't follow politics, which is the vast majority of people, and there's good reason why not to. I'm not chiding anyone for not following it, but those who do know the following. There's just been a general principle over the past 200 years. When there has been under the Constitution, the Congress creates the number of judgeships. We, the Congress, decide whether there are going to be 2 district court judges in America or 2,000. Whether there are going to be 20 or 5,000 circuit court judges. We're the ones under the Constitution who make that decision. Now, as the country has grown, we've needed more judges to enforce the laws that have been passed. Not enforce them, to pass judgment on the laws that have been passed. Now, Mr. President, an unusual circumstance came around last year. I, after having been around the country a little bit, and with the urging of the distinguished senior senator from South Carolina and others, were told, and they're right, that there weren't a sufficient number of judges out there in order to be able to prosecute all these cases. Now, everybody knows that you cannot ultimately put someone in jail until you get them before a judge. You can't be tough on crime if there's no way to get them from the street when you arrest them in front of a judge, because that's the intermediate stop if they're guilty to get to jail. We have it's an unusual little system like that. So you need judges. Now, I'm told that the backups, particularly on drug cases, in South Miami, in South Florida, in parts of the Southwest, all around America, are incredible. So the president said to me, not directly, well, I guess he did by letter, said, look, we need more judges. I did something that is not particularly common for this place. I went into a group of Democrats, you were there and others, and said, look, ladies and gentlemen, we should create new judgeships. And someone said, wait a minute, we're going to create new judgeships, and the president's going to take all these Republican conservatives and make them judges. And we don't like that. And besides, Joe, nobody does that. When there's a Democratic president, the Republicans don't let new judges be created. And when there's a Republican president, Democrats don't create new judges. And I stood there before you all, and it didn't take long because you all agreed with me that the nation needed new judges because the law enforcement problem was serious, urgent. So we did something not only unusual but swiftly. We created 84 new judgeships, 85 new judgeships. Let me be precise. Now, and the reason we did it is so that more criminals could be brought to justice in federal court. Yet today, 200 days later, only 10. The president has only sent up the name of 10 men or women to fill those 85 slots. Who's tough on crime? Who's being diligent? The Congress is weak on crime? He said, we need new judges. We said, Mr. President, here they are. And here's where they are. We had a little disagreement with the Justice Department. I wanted to put the judges into areas where there were high crime rates and high backups of crime. So we worked out a formula where they had the most drug problems, the most drug cases, and we put judges there. And here we are, 200 days later, not 100 days, 200 days later, and the president, who calls us soft and weak on crime, hasn't sent us but the names of 15 people. And as we all know under the Constitution, we can't fill those judgeships. We can't sit here and say, you know, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so should fill those spots, and then vote on it. So, here we are, 200 days later. Those judgeship slots are still empty. Last week, the president said he, quote, could not understand, end of quote, why the Congress could not pass a crime bill in 100 days. Today, I must say, I cannot understand why the President of the United States has been unable to exercise this important crime-fighting power of appointing new judges in 200 days. Let me put it another way, Mr. President. In the past 1,000 days, Congress has given the power to the President to take away every penny a drug dealer makes, seize their houses, their cars, their boats, their jewelry, lock them up without parole or probation, and even execute them if need be. We've already done our part, and now it's time for the administration to do its part. The laws are there, the tools are there to make a dent in this horrible crime problem. Yet instead of getting better, things are only getting worse. And Mr. President, having said that, I want to turn now to the crime bill pending before us today. The President says that he wants to get criminals off the streets. There's not a woman or man in this chamber that disagrees with that. But the heart of the President's bill is to stop, let me put it another way. The heart of the President's bill, I believe, are basically shop-worn proposals that, whatever their merit, will do very little to reduce crime in this country. The President's death penalty proposals, and I might add, the Biden crime bill is before us, calls for the death penalty for 51 offenses. A wag in the newspaper recently wrote that something to the effect that Biden has made it a death penalty offense for everything but jaywalking. The President's bill calls for the death penalty on 46 offenses. The difference is negligible. Yet let's put it in, I am a supporter of the death penalty. I am a supporter of the death penalty without the racial justice provision in it. I think it's better with it, but I'm supportive without it in it as well. But let's put this in perspective, Mr. President. There were, last year, in this country, over 23,000 murders. Over 23,000 murders. Now, the president is making it sound to the American people like once this death penalty provision is passed, and I believe we will pass one, that we are going to end the problem. So I asked my staff to write to the Justice Department, not the Democratic Justice Department, not the bipartisan Justice Department, not the scholastic Justice Department, not the academic Justice Department, not the Brookings Justice Department, but the President's Justice Department, the Republican Justice Department, headed by a Republican, as it should be, a Republican Attorney General, at the command of the Republican President. And I asked him, I said, would you write to them and ask them the following question? I'm paraphrasing. If the death penalty bill, as you are proposing it, Mr. President, as you are proposing it to be enacted in the year 1991, if that were the law in the year 1990, how many people would have received the death penalty under your death penalty bill? We wrote him a letter and asked him that question. Now, keep in mind, 23,000 murders last year. I tried this on a couple people at home who aren't involved in the Senate at all. I said, if you had that death penalty bill, how many people you think the Justice Department now, okay, the outfit that works for the President, how many people do you think they say would be put to death last year if the President's death bill had been in place? 5,000? 10,000? 2,000? 500? 100? 50? 10? No. 6. S-I-X. 6. That's what the President says. If you passed my bill and it were in effect last year, there would be 6 people. 6. Now, this isn't our number. This is their number. Give them 100 and a straight A for honesty. 6. Well, I think if 6 people deserve the death penalty, they should be given the death penalty. But let's not oversell it, Mr. President. And the same can be said for the Biden death penalty bill. Because it is federal, if it's not on Indian lands, and this excludes Indian lands, only 6 people. But yet, if you listen to the way it's advertised, people at home think if you passed either the Biden death penalty bill or the President's, that we would increase the number of death penalty cases in America by 100 or 500 or 1,000 or 10,000. That's going to stop crime in the streets? 6 more people being put to death? Second provision that we'll fight over, that the President's bill has, is habeas corpus. The President's habeas corpus reform plan is arguably very good. I disagree with parts of it because I think we should change habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is that thing. Most people, if you listen to the President and others speak about habeas corpus, you'd think that habeas corpus is the name of a man who is crouched in an alley every night waiting to rape or murder somebody. Habeas corpus is a process. And it means that once you are convicted of a death penalty case, and all cases, that need not only apply to death cases, but let's just keep them death cases. You're convicted of murder in a state court. It means that prisoner can file a piece of paper with a federal court. And he can say on that paper, look, the state court of Delaware or Alabama or California violated my constitutional rights, Judge. They didn't apply the federal Constitution. Here's my habeas corpus petition. Now, I'm already behind bars when I file that. every single person who files a habeas corpus petition is already in jail. Does not in any way affect whether my mother is going to be safer on Saturday night or Thursday night when she goes to the Pathmark to shop and comes out into the parking lot in the dark to put her groceries in her car. Habeas corpus change will not affect her at all, because all the people who file these petitions, by definition, must be behind bars. They're in jail. They can't get out. That's why they put the paper out there. They say, let me out or rehear my case, because look, here's the bad thing the court did to me. That's habeas corpus. Now, what's happened is it's become abused. Somebody's sentenced to death. What happens, what they do is they file a specious petition saying, well, they coerced my confession. And then they put it out there, slide it between the bars, figuratively speaking, and it goes to a federal district court. And the federal district court goes, well, I look at this and I look at the record, and it looks to me like that wasn't violated. And then the guy in jail's lawyer says, well, I want to appeal that. And they take it up to the Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Circuit Court of Appeals goes, well, yeah, look, it looks like no violation was made here. The guy was rightly convicted. And the guy, then they say, whoa, wait, I'm going to file cert. I want to go to the Supreme Court. And by the time that all gets done, even though I was supposed to be sentenced to death on July the 4th, now it's 4 years later. It takes that long for it to get there. And so I sit there in my jail cell and I'm still alive. And then when they come back and say, nope, it wasn't violated. No one violated any of your rights. Now you get put to death. I say, wait a minute, got another idea. I say they kicked my dog in court, you know, and I'm being a little facetious now, but come up with another claim. And so I slide another piece of paper out the door. And that goes to the district court. The district court says, wait, no, this is not, nothing's wrong here. And they say, well, take it to the circuit court. And that's why, as the senator from South Carolina is going to tell us today, as he should, there are axe murderers and violent murderers in his state who have maimed. He had a woman come before our committee who was brutally raped and beaten and physically maimed. And the guy that did it to her, beyond a reasonable doubt, a jury concluding that he did it, was in the jail, sat there for 18 years or something, or some incredible amount of time.
12 years.
12 years. Because he kept filing these habeas corpus petitions. So the issue here is, how do we stop that? We don't want to take away the right of the federal court to oversee whether a state court's applying the Constitution, because we all know from our history, sometimes they don't. But we don't want this repetitive thing to keep going. So I have a bill that says, look, you get to file one of these papers, and it's got to be filed within 1 year, and it's got to be adjudicated, and that's it, unless, and then there's 3 exceptions. What we're going to argue about is whether there should be exceptions, not whether or not there should be a habeas corpus change. But listening to the president, he says the second big anti-crime initiative to make you safer on the streets of Washington tonight is to change the habeas corpus law. Now, how many of you think tonight, people in the gallery, I wonder, how many of them think as they walk out here tonight, back to their hotel rooms tonight, I wonder how many of them think, you know, they changed that habeas corpus, and I'll bet that guy's not going to try to take my purse, or I bet that guy's not going to knock me in the head, because he's going to think, geez, before I do that, habeas corpus has been changed. I'm not going to do that. It's a big incentive to keep me safe. Yet lest people in this chamber and this gallery think I'm kidding, go back and listen to what the president says every time he says he's going to make the streets safer for you. He's going to give you the death penalty. I want the death penalty. But he says only 6 people it'll apply to. Then he says, I'm going to change habeas corpus. You feel safer because habeas corpus has changed? I wonder how many criminals in their first act of violence even know what habeas corpus is. They've probably been listening to the president too and think it's an individual. But that's the second big initiative, folks. And the reason why it's offered is not only should it be changed, but it's the hot button for every civil libertarian in America, because it is the great writ. It is 800 years old. And every time you say you're going to start fooling around with that one, everybody, including me, goes, now wait a minute, let's be careful here. But the debate today and tonight and tomorrow and next week on habeas corpus is going to be about how many times you can slide that paper between the bars. But you are behind bars. What's the third proposal the president has that's going to stop crime in the streets? The exclusionary rule. Now here's a rule that really will get some people in this chamber and in this nation a little riled up, and with some good reason. Because they see on LA Law, they see in the newspaper for real, they see where somebody's been arrested. And when they got arrested, the cops found the goods, found the murder weapon on them or in their house, found the drugs in their car, found the contraband, the stolen television in their apartment, found blood samples and hair follicles on their rug, found things that allow the prosecution to prove that Charlie did it, or Harry did it, or Mary did it. And then along comes the lawyer for Charlie, Mary, or Harry and says, even though you have that evidence, that if you ever show it to a jury is surely going to convict my client, you can't show that evidence to the jury because when the police got that evidence, they violated the constitutional right of an individual when they got it. And under our law, we have an enshrined principle that says, if you violate, for example, if without a search warrant and without probable cause, I break down the door of your house and I go in and I find something there to sustain that you did something wrong, I can't go into court and say, look, arrest this guy and convict him because look what I found in his house. Because if you allowed that to happen, police who didn't like individuals would say, I don't like Charlie, I'm just going to periodically break down his door. Go in, search his house, see what it is. I'm going to stop anybody I want on the street and frisk them. I mean, how would the folks feel if we didn't have a Fourth Amendment which says you're not entitled. The police, the state are not entitled to illegally search you and seize your property. Everybody says, oh, it wouldn't matter to me until the first time it happens. So, to keep police from doing that, and police, by the way, 99.9% don't do anything like this. And for the record, just in case you're wondering, every major police organization that I'm aware of has been a supporter of mine, endorses me, and I work with, so I am not an anti-cop guy. But there are some police who violate the law, the Constitution, just like there's some individuals who do it in any walk of life. And so we have this rule called exclusionary rule. And up to now, the way it works is we say, look, you've got to have probable cause and you've got to have a search warrant. You got to go to a judge and say, before I break into Harry's house, Judge, I'm telling you why I want to be able to break into Harry's house. We've had that house under surveillance, and we've watched in that apartment, it's only 1,300 square feet, we noticed that he has 12 48-inch televisions. And the place down the street is missing 12 48-inch televisions. So we think that maybe Charlie done it. And the judge will say, okay, police officer, here's a search warrant to go to 227 Maple Street without getting permission. Knock on the door, say, let us in. If they say no, you can break the door down to go in. Now, what happens sometimes is the person who types that up, instead of saying 227 Maple, it says 227 Apple. And so a police officer in good faith takes that search warrant, looks down and says 227 Apple, goes to 227 Apple, knocks on the door of an innocent person. Innocent person says, no, you can't come into my house. And the cop says, here I come, and breaks the door down. And when they break the door down, coincidentally, they don't find television sets, but they find out that there's stolen bicycles in there. And they say, whoa, you're not the person we're looking for, but guess what? You did something wrong. Now we're arresting you, and we're going to admit those bicycles in evidence. Now, I think if that happens with a police officer, he should be able to say, hey, look, Judge, I made a good faith mistake. So, you should still be able to admit that evidence. I didn't deliberately go to do that. It was a typo. I didn't do anything wrong as a police officer. Well, the leader of the Republicans says, no, not only should you do what Biden's suggesting, expanding the change in the exclusionary rule, you should be able to say, even when you don't have a search warrant, if you can say, if you knock down a door without a search warrant and then later say, you know, golly, I made a mistake. I thought I was in Maple and it was really Apple. Or I thought I was going after Jones and it looked like Jones, but it turned out to be Wilson. Well, now we're getting a little shaky. Because now if a police officer has been looking for you but can't get any evidence on you, I wonder how many might be tempted to say, you know, I'm following Jones back to his house and I'm going to break down Jones's door and I'm going to say, oh my goodness, I thought it was that cat burglar Wilson I was going after. Well, that's extending the rule. And it gets a little shaky. I don't think we should do that. But in good faith, people think we should be able to do that. And I respect their judgment. But now what's the president say? His third big thing that he's going to do to stop crime in the street. He's going to change the exclusionary rule to say the following. Not only if you make a mistake in good faith with a search warrant, or make a mistake in good faith without a search warrant, but if you make a mistake in bad faith, if you say, I don't like Jones, and I'm going to find something on that so-and-so, and I go break his door down, it's no mistake, I had no right to be there under the Constitution, but I find a gun. The president actually proposes an unusual proposition for American law, that it doesn't matter whether it's good faith or bad faith, constitutional or unconstitutional, if you find a gun when you break in, everything's all right. I wonder how many police officers will be issued 2 guns, one to carry and one to plant, if that crazy change in the law were able to take place. Can you imagine that? You can say, I am going to violate the Constitution, but if I find a gun, it's okay. Now, I don't want to get into teaching a class because I'm not qualified on ethics or morals, but in undergraduate school, I recall those courses in philosophy where we talked about the ends justifying the means. Now, in America, if there's any one principle we have resisted employing in any aspect of our daily life is the notion of the ends justifying the means. We have said the way to keep people law-abiding and civilized is to make sure that the means justify the ends. We're going to enshrine in the law a new proposition, according to the president. If the means justifies the ends, so be it, Constitution. So be it, Constitution. If it doesn't work, just tear that piece up. Put it over here. We'll move on. We'll worry about another piece later. But Leave aside the merits for a minute. This is the third big thing the president says that is going to stop crime in the street, that's going to make it safer for my mother in the Pathmark parking lot. And guess what, folks? Of the 5,700,000 felonies committed in America last year, of all those where someone is arrested and it goes to trial, in only 1% of the cases is the exclusionary rule an issue. Only 1% of the time does the defense counsel say on behalf of a defendant, that piece of evidence you have to convict my client under the Constitution should not be admitted. 1%. So as the presiding officer, who's one of the finest lawyers in this body and also a former attorney general, knows, we sometimes argue in the alternative. Let me argue in the alternative. For the sake of discussion, assume that the president on the merits is right about the exclusionary rule. Assume you should be able to say to the Constitution, we'll just put that piece aside for a while because we found a way to get to it. Assume he's right to do that. Even if he is, it affects 1% of the cases. Now let's go back and tally up the president's anti-crime message. The same president who over 1,000 days has only convicted one person of death after the tough crime law we passed, who says if you have a quarter's worth of crack, you have to have 5 times, 10 times that much in New York and 100 times that much in Miami before my prosecutors will even prosecute you. The same guy who says, knowing that we are able to put people in jail for life for drug offenses, has only 4 times a year done that. The same guy, or his administration, now says, but now I'm really going to get tough. I'm going to change the death penalty. Biden and I both want to change it. He likes this thing called racial justice. We think that's going to do away with the death penalty, so he's wrong about that. But I'm going to make it for 46 crimes. Biden says make it for 51. We're going to get tough. I'm for the death penalty. His own Justice Department says 6 people. 6 people other than on Indian reservations. 6. So now my mom knows that there are going to be 6 fewer people next year out of the 23,500 murders committed, and I don't know by how many people. 6 of them will be gone. Good, I want to do that. Now, he says, and the second thing I'm going to do to get tough is I'm going to change habeas corpus. That's what I'm going to do, knowing every one of those people are behind bars. My mother can only hope, as I said earlier, somewhat facetiously, that before the guy bangs her on the head, God forbid, they say, oh, wait, I just remembered habeas corpus has been changed. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to buy my own groceries. That's the second big thing he's going to do to make us safe in the street. And the third big thing his administration has come up with is change the exclusionary rule, allowing on a limited basis to shred the Fourth Amendment. Only limited basis. Shed the Fourth Amendment, affecting 1% of the cases. Okay, that's it, folks. What else is the president going to do to make sure that we are, in fact, safe? Well, he's going to change the gun laws somewhat, although I'm not sure that's going to be introduced here. He talked about changing the gun laws to make the penalties tougher if you get caught with a gun. I'm all for that. We already have a law, I believe, that says if you get caught with a firearm in the commission of a felony, it's 5 years. Is that right? We already have that law. If he wants to make it 10 years, I'll make it 10 years. You got a gun, you commit a felony, 10 years. We already have it 5 years. Minimum mandatory. Judge can't say, you know, you had it in your pocket, you never intended to use it, we're only going to give you 1 year. Judge has to say 5 years. Well, he wants to make it 10 or 20 or 60. We can work that out. But what else is he doing? Well, let me tell you what he's not doing. The president's tough talk and his attorney general's tough talk, and we look at this crime bill and we read his lips and we see that there are no new police. No new police that may cruise through that parking lot that my mom's in, shopping. And by the way, you may think I'm being a little facetious when I say this. I mean this seriously when I say this. Because there's not a woman or a man in this chamber up here who, when their mother, who's 75 years old, goes shopping, doesn't worry about their safety. Or when their husband or wife are out on a business trip overnight in a motel that they've never been to before. Or when their kids have to go downtown to the downtown library coming back home. Or they walk through the mall. Not a person that doesn't worry about their kids, their mother, their husband, or wife. So I'm not kidding when I say this. President says, when you read his bill and read his lips, no new police. Zero. Not an extra patrol car to ride through that parking lot where my mother is on the chance that at the time something might happen to my mom, the patrol car rides around. No, we're going to rest on the death penalty, habeas corpus, and exclusionary to take care of that. No new prosecutors. You were a prosecutor. A lot of people in here were prosecutors. No new prosecutors. Zero. None. No new prisons. There's not a person I would respectfully suggest, Mr. President, in this gallery today, from all over America and various parts of the world, that isn't aware of the following assertion I'm going to make. I doubt whether there's one person over the age of 12 in that gallery that isn't aware of the fact that there are some hardened criminals who have been let out of jail before their sentence was served in their community because their prison is overcrowded. And because the federal court has ruled it's a violation of the 8th Amendment, cruel, unusual punishment, keeping them in a cell 6 by 8 with 4 people or whatever. Not one person doesn't know that. Everybody, I suspect, in this chamber, in this gallery, wants to get tough on convicted beyond a reasonable doubt criminals. Yet does anybody know how we can do that without more prisons? Can anybody tell me that? I propose new prisons. The President wants no new prisons. So, before I get to my bill and the provisions in it, let's look at what some of the things the President doesn't want. He wants the death penalty. I want it. He wants a change in habeas corpus. I want it. He wants a change in the exclusionary rule. I want it, but not nearly what he wants. But that's it, by and large. He doesn't want more prosecutors. He doesn't want more prisons. He doesn't want more police. He doesn't want more aid to local law enforcement. He doesn't want help to fight juvenile gangs in America. And the list goes on. He says, don't worry, I'll make the streets safe with these 3 things. I don't need any of these over here.